Miss Lucas here for your ELA instructional video. We are going to be reading Fish Cheeks together and filling out our first read activity form, which is located on your Google Doc. So I'm hoping you're coming to this lesson, already completed your warm-up activity, and now I'm going to give you a quick overview of our first read graphic organizer that we're going to use. So we're actually looking at 4 things today, and the first one is notice. Who is the story about? What happens? Where and when it happens, and why those involved react as they do. So we are really focusing on the characters, that conflict, and the reactions. The second box to the right is annotate, and that means you are marking vocabulary, key passages you want to revisit. So that could include the footnotes, that could include unknown words, or that can include paragraphs or maybe a quote that you think is significant that you want to come back and revisit later. And then we have connect. That means that you are connecting the ideas within the selection to what you already know and what you've already read in this unit. So that this word selection is referring to the text here. Sometimes it may be a photograph or a video or a short story or a poem. So the word selection really covers all of those features. And the next one is respond by writing a brief summary of the selection. So once again, you're writing a quick summary of the text that you have read today. So the first two, notice and annotate, are really going to take place as you're reading, and then connect and respond are going to take place after you read. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and begin reading our text, Fish Cheeks by Amy Tan, together. We're going to read what is in the gray box because that is known as the background information, and remember that sets us up as readers to know about the context and what we're going to read about. Amy Tan, born 1952, is an American writer whose work often provides insight into the experiences of Chinese Americans and mother-daughter relationships. While her parents immigrated from China, Tan herself was born in Oakland, California. As you read, take notes on how the author's use of imagery contributes to the overall tone. Let's go ahead and begin reading this first page of the text, starting in paragraph 1. I fell in love with the minister's son the winter I turned 14. He was not Chinese, but as white as Mary in the manger. For Christmas, I prayed for this blonde-haired boy, Robert, and his slim new American nose. When I found out that my parents had invited the minister's family over for Christmas Eve dinner, I cried. What would Robert think of our shabby Chinese Christmas? What would he think of our noisy Chinese relatives who lacked proper American manners? What terrible disappointment would he feel upon seeing not a roasted turkey and sweet potatoes, but Chinese food? On Christmas Eve, I saw that my mother had outdone herself in creating a strange menu. She was pulling black veins out of the backs of fleshy prawns. The kitchen was littered with appalling mounds of raw food, a slimy rock cod with bulging eyes that pleaded not to be thrown into a pan of hot oil, tofu which looked like stacked wedges of rubbery white sponges, a bowl soaking dried fungus back to life, a plate of squid, their backs crisscrossed with knife markings so they resembled bicycle tires. And then they arrived, the minister's family and all my relatives in a clamor of doorbells and rumpled Christmas packages. Robert grunted hello, and I pretended he was not worthy of my existence. So a few things to notice before I jump to my graphic organizer. We see a lot of footnotes. So I see a lot of numbers here with prawns and appalling. And then we see the word clamor. And we know that we can find these definitions down below because it has a number beside. So, for example, prawn is a common name used particularly in the United Kingdom and Ireland for large swimming crustaceans or shrimp. So a prawn, a fleshy prawn, may not be something that we see a lot, but that is the footnote that is provided for us. The word appalling means causing shock, disgust, or alarm. And then her relatives are in a clamor, and we see that means loud and confusing noise. So those words are given to us as readers through the footnotes. So let's go ahead and start answering our notice and annotate section on our graphic organizer. So who is the story about, what happens, and where it happens, and when it happens, and why those involved react the way they do. So I'm going to start by just adding some bullet points, and I would encourage you to go ahead and do this with me. So we see that the story is about a 14-year-old girl who has a crush on a boy, Robert. So we also see, I can also add in that she is a Chinese American because we see that she was born in Oakland. And I can say that she has a crush on an American boy named Robert. And the girl's family invites Robert's family over for dinner on Christmas Eve. And she is worried about what Robert and would think because they have different traditions. Because we should see here in the second paragraph that would he be disappointed if he, since they're not having turkey and sweet potatoes, which may be like a common American dinner around Christmas time, and instead seeing Chinese food. So we see that her mother is cooking and it's a feast. We see that she acknowledges that her mother has outdone herself in creating this Chinese food dinner for their American guest, and they're having raw food, they're having tofu, and they're having squid, and she's making all of this for her guest. And they arrive, and we see that they're coming in a clamor, which means loud and confusing noise of doorbells and packages. And then we see Robert show up, and she is super nervous, and she is pretending that he was not worthy of existence. So she was very nervous. So, are there any places that you feel like we need to come back to and revisit? You can mark those there if there's a certain paragraph, or if there's any words. So I want to mark the word like bulging eyes. So what do you think that means, and why do you think that the author added that descriptive word here whenever she is describing the food? So bulging eyes that pleaded not to be thrown into the hot pan of hot oil. What do you think that means? I see a lot of other vocab words are already given to us, so we're going to go ahead and move down. Dinner threw me deeper into despair. My relatives licked the ends of their chopsticks and reached across the table, dipping them into the dozen or so plates of food. Robert and his family waited patiently for platters to be passed to them. My relatives murmured with pleasure when my mother brought out the whole steamed fish. Robert grimaced. Then my father poked his chopsticks just below the fisheye and plucked out the soft meat. Amy, your favorite, he said, offering me the tender fish cheek. I wanted to disappear. At the end of the meal, my father leaned back and belched loudly, thanking my mother for her fine cooking. It's a polite Chinese custom to show you're satisfied, explained my father to our astonished guest. Robert was looking down at his plate with a reddened face. The minister managed to muster up a quiet burp. I was stunned into silence for the rest of the night. After everyone had gone, my mother said to me, "You want to be the same as American girls on the outside." She handed me an early gift. It was a miniskirt and beige tweed. But inside, you must always be Chinese. You must be proud you are different. Your only shame is to have shame. And even though I didn't agree with her then, I knew that she understood how much I had suffered during the evening's dinner. It wasn't until many years later, long after I'd gotten over my crush on Robert, that I was able to fully appreciate her lesson and true purpose behind our particular menu. For Christmas Eve that year, she had chosen all my favorite foods. So once again, we're going to go back to our notice and annotate box. What happens, where and when it happens, and why those involved react as they do. So I'm going to add some space and continue on. So her relatives were reaching across the table to access the food while the American family was waiting for food to be passed. So we see kind of like a difference in expectations for dinner time. And we see that his family was appreciating the food and even belched, which was surprising to the other family, to the guests. If we look at the 6th paragraph, we see that Robert was looking down at his plate with a reddened face, and he was kind of embarrassed at the situation. And we can infer that the narrator was uncomfortable, and we can even say she was embarrassed as well, because we see in the last line of the 5th paragraph that she wanted to disappear. So some places that we may want to revisit is paragraph 5 and paragraph 7. So we see that after everyone left, her mother came up to her and was talking to her and discussing with her about the evening. And she even gave her a gift. And she acknowledged that she noticed that she wanted to be American on the outside, but how important it was to remain true to her culture and her beliefs on the inside. And we're actually going to look at this quote, "Your only shame is to have shame," in our next lesson. But that's definitely something that we want to revisit as a reader, because we really see kind of like a lesson learned in this paragraph. And we see that in paragraph 8, we notice that the story is being retold later on, and that time has passed in this paragraph. Okay, now what we're going to do is at the end of this video, you are going to complete the next 2 boxes on your own with connect and respond. And remember, connecting means that you are comparing this text to something else that you've read in this unit, or maybe even our essential question, which is, what are some triumphs and challenges of growing up, and how does that relate to this text? And then the respond by writing a brief summary of the selection. Remember that a summary is concise and you're only picking out the key points.